London is one of the most important cities in the world. With around 14 million citizens living in the area, London is Europe's most populated city and offers work for millions of people. It's the capital of Great Britain and a prime example of a global city, not only because of the London Stock Exchange, which is Europe's biggest marketplace for currency and shares. To learn more about how London became what it is today, we have to go way back in time. When the Romans invaded Britain in 43 AD, they built a bridge across the Thames. A few years later, a port was built near it. For the Romans, this was an excellent place, because the Thames was deep enough to reach the port with the ocean-going ships. But the ocean was still far enough away so that the harbor couldn't easily be attacked. The town, which was founded next to the port in about 50 AD, was Londinium, later renamed to London. About 100 years later, London's population reached 30,000. The population peaked with about 60,000 inhabitants in the 2nd century. Many years later, in 604, St. Paul's Cathedral was built during the reign of St. Ethelbert, King of Kent and first Christian king in England. At first, the cathedral was built out of wood. It caught fire and burned down in 675, but was rebuilt a few years later. The cathedral we can visit today changed a lot over time. Parts were destroyed and rebuilt over time. The cathedral once had a height of 149 meters, making it one of the largest buildings at the time, until the main tower got destroyed in 1561 by a lightning strike. The tower was replaced by a dome, making the cathedral only 111 meters or 365 feet tall. That's 1 foot for every day of the year. In the 9th century, Britain was threatened again. The Danes attacked it several times at several places. After London and the Thames were captured in 851, the Britons tried to regain control. In 886, under Alfred the Great, London was finally under British control again. Alfred the Great then started rebuilding almost the whole city of London. He renovated the walls and the waterfronts on the Thames and created a new street plan. Today's street plan is still based on the plan introduced by Alfred the Great. Two centuries later, the Britons were ruled by King Edward the Confessor. Under his influence, the citizens of London had enjoyed the rights of freedom and independence. In 1066, when King Edward died, William the Conqueror was already Duke of Normandy and wanted to become his successor. At first, many people rejected him. His parents were not married when he was born, which led to people calling him a bastard. But he actually wanted to keep the freedom and independence of London citizens, and in the end, he was King of England until he died in 1087. London was built on both sides of the Thames. Since London had been founded, bridges had to be built to connect the two parts of the city. London Bridge is especially popular and important. At its current location, there has been a bridge ever since the Romans founded the city, but over time, it was modernized and rebuilt several times. In 1176, the bridge was rebuilt out of stone to make it more resistant against the many problems with the easily destroyable wooden bridge. In 1411, the construction of a huge magnificent building, which we can still admire today, was started, the Guildhall. In the 15th century, the Guildhall was the center of London's government. Today, the Guildhall can be used for public and private events like conferences, concerts, or meetings. For many people, it's a place of connection to their mother country, their culture, and their ancestors. The earliest map of London tells us more about the structure of London in the 16th century. Comparing today's structure of London with the historic architecture can reveal many insights about the historic London. The map uses the bird's eye view perspective, which is very unusual for the time. You can see London as if you were looking out of a plane's window. Let's visit a tradition that came up in the 17th century. We are visiting the first coffee house, opened by a Greek in London in 1652. Previously, tea was the most widely spread hot drink, so coffee was something new. People met at the coffee house to have political or philosophical discussions. Going forward 14 years, on the 2nd September of 1666, a disaster struck in London. Just a few months after the Great Plague epidemic, in which around 100,000 people died, London had to face yet another disaster. A fire broke out at Thomas Farriner's bakery in Pudding Lane a little after midnight. Both the weather conditions and the architecture of the traditional buildings enabled the fire to spread easily from building to building. The narrow streets made it hard to fight the fire, and many people had to flee their homes. Because of how nobody realized how fast the fire spread over the city, many people moved their belongings multiple times to safe buildings. Late on Monday, many people finally realized that they had to flee London altogether, which led to a panic at the borders, with many refugees trying to save their belongings. In total, about 70,000 people became homeless, and about 13,200 buildings were destroyed in the Great Fire of London. After the fire, the city flourished again. It became more modern over time. Many of the sites London is known for today arose. The importance of London and the world started to rise. The Bank of England was one sign that London was becoming one of the most important cities in the world. After Queen Mary's husband had spent a lot of money for expensive wars, the bank was opened to boost the economy and enforce new regulations. Until the Second World War, the Bank of England was private. It was and still is responsible for big parts of the economical management of England. St. Paul's Cathedral is a famous site visited by many tourists every year. The cathedral was built on the highest point of London, just like the old St. Paul's Cathedral, which lasted over 1,400 years. The new cathedral was finished in 1710. It was the first cathedral that was built after the English Reformation. London is known for its red omnibuses, mostly used for sightseeing tours today. Mr. George Shillabeer steered the first omnibus through London in 1829. The buses were pulled by 3 horses. He got the idea from M. Lafitte, who had invented the omnibus in Paris. Later, he got more omnibuses. The buses were modernized but are still iconic for London today. In 1831, New London Bridge was opened. Engineer John Rennie was asked to plan the new construction. He died in 1821, 3 years before the construction on the new bridge started in 1824. His 2 sons took over his responsibility, and the New London Bridge finally opened in 1831. King William IV and Queen Adelaide arrived by water to celebrate the opening of the new bridge. The construction survived less than 140 years until it was replaced by today's bridge. Between 1968 and 1971, its facing stone was dismantled and shipped across the Atlantic Ocean to the U.S. state of Arizona, where it was resurrected on a 5-span core of reinforced concrete to serve as a tourist attraction at the resort town of Lake Havasu City. The industrialization took place in the 19th century. Growing cities and a rising economy are typical of the era of industrialization. London's division into different postal districts in the 19th century shows that London was a huge city back then. The postal districts simplified the organization of the postal services because every postal district was mostly independent. The letters were denoted based on their target district to reach their destination much faster. Omnibuses weren't the only way to get from A to B. In 1863, the first underground line between the Paddington and Farringdon Street opened. Parts of it are still working today, which is one of the many reasons the London Underground is popular today. One of London's most iconic landmarks is the Tower Bridge. Its design reminds us of a time long before its opening in 1894. Tower Bridge was built as an alternative to London Bridge and was very important for the rising traffic. But the bridge was also planned as a representative building of London. A competition for the best design of the new bridge was organized in 1876, which was won by Sir Horace Jones and Sir John Wolfe-Barry. More than 200 years had passed without any catastrophic events in London. World War I began in 1914. Germany played a major role and, among others, was responsible for the war. Germany didn't want a war with England, but England supported Germany's enemies, France and Russia. To threaten the UK, Germany sent a Zeppelin to London at night on May 31st in 1915, which dropped 90 incendiary bombs and 30 grenades. A panic broke out, and 7 people died. In the 1930s, the Nazis took over in Germany and began World War II. Hitler wanted England's capitulation after his victory against France. He wanted to occupy the Soviet Union in the east. To reach this goal, he wanted to defend all the European countries that could attack Germany during the war with the Soviet Union. Hitler dropped bombs on London in 57 nights from 1940 to 1941. But the UK didn't capitulate. Germany's bombing attacks gave the people in England more of a will to fight against Germany, and at last, Hitler lost the war. After the Second World War, London kept developing to one of the most important cities. London has many landmarks and sites which connect us to the history of the British capital. People have been building bridges in London for over 3,000 years. The bridges, the British culture, and monumental buildings like the St. Paul's Cathedral have defined London. These and many more reasons have helped London become the great city it is today.